If you could articulate what lobbying actually look like when we talk about situations like this, because the average person, they hear this and they're like, lobbying sounds bad, but they don't realize how bad it actually is. Could you paint the picture for us?
I'm going to give you the most egregious example that I can think of, and it's an older one. This is way back in the day. There are the 9/11 families wanted to sue Saudi Arabia because of mounting evidence that Saudi Arabia, the government of Saudi Arabia, had connections to the 9/11 hijackers. And this is a huge court case that's been going on. And Saudi Arabia wants to make sure that no, we need to be immune from these lawsuits. And so what they did is they poured a ton of money into local lobbying firms who went and then hired U.S. veterans, unbeknownst that those U.S. veterans, they did not know that the money was coming from Saudi, and basically had these U.S. veterans going up on the Hill and knocking on doors of members of Congress and saying, oh, you can't support this bill that would allow for lawsuits. Basically doing the bidding of the Saudi government because they couldn't do it directly.
Instead of focusing on winning arguments, we're teaching the basic fundamentals of sales and marketing and how we can use them to win in the world of politics, teaching you how to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. Welcome to the Brian Nichols Show.
Well, hey there, folks. Brian Nichols here on the Brian Nichols Show, and thank you for joining us on, of course, another fun-filled episode. I am, as always, your humble host, joining you from our lovely Cardio Miracle Studios here in sunny Eastern Indiana. The Brian Nichols Show is powered by our friends over at AMP America, folks. If you're looking for all the news you need to know without that corporate media bias or fluff, head to ampamerica.com. We have podcasts, we have news articles, opinion pieces, and more, all available at ampamerica.com. Also, the Brian Nichols Show is powered by our phenomenal studio sponsor, Cardio Miracle, which is, yes, the best heart health supplement in the world, bar none. I've been using Cardio Miracle for a year plus now, and folks, the Cardio Miracle difference is 1000% real. If you want to learn more about how Cardio Miracle can help lower your blood pressure, help improve your sleep, improve that pump at the gym, plus just give you an overall better ticker, stick around. We're going to talk about more of Cardio Miracle later in today's episode. But first, let's talk foreign policy. Let's talk specifically, I guess, a common sense approach to foreign policy. Now, we've seen this conversation drift over the past few years from common sense foreign policy to, yes, some folks will argue, well, this is just not non-interventionism. This is isolationism. We've even seen some presidential hopefuls, or heck, a guy who did, in fact, win the presidency, and one Donald Trump, talking about we should be America first. So let's talk about this American foreign policy and where we should be focusing when it comes to actually improving our standing in the world, but also improving our standing here at home. To discuss all that and more, joining us from the Quincy Institute today is Kelley Vlahos. Welcome to the Brian Nichols Show. How you doing?
Great, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you on. I need to apologize at the onset that I sound like Kermit the Frog mixed with Jordan Peterson. My lovely 14-month-old decided to give me whatever ick she found when she was at the playground. So thanks, my lovely daughter. But with that being said, Kelley, I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. So do us a favor, introduce yourself here to the audience and why this focus on your world, specifically as we talk today about foreign policy from an American perspective.
Sure. Again, Kelley Vlahos. I am the editorial director of the Quincy Institute's online foreign policy magazine, Responsible Statecraft. Please, responsiblestatecraft.org. It's a wonderful place, a platform for foreign policy writers, journalists, commentators who are basically looking for alternatives, independent reporting and analysis on foreign policy, getting away from the Washington blob and the way we have been doing things for the last 70 years, and actually coming up with fresh ideas that would basically reorient our foreign policy away from militarization and intervention across the globe, whether that be proxy wars, committed military conflict and intervention, or even police action. As Donald Trump said, we need not be the policemen of the globe. So the Quincy Institute is dedicated to sort of moving towards diplomatic focused foreign policy, more diplomacy, less war. We're doing it on all cylinders, whether it be regional stuff, Washington politics, reforming the military industrial complex, which is, a mighty task. But we're not just sitting around as a think tank, just kind of pushing a lot of papers and research around, but really on the ground in Washington, on Capitol Hill, trying to change perspectives, taking advantage of some of those changes that you mentioned, in which both Republicans and Democrats have shifted focus away from the endless wars of the 2000s and are looking for different ways of doing things and working together. We're a transpartisan organization, which puts us in a kind of a weird spot, but liberating to me, in that we're not loyal to either party. We're not delivering the talking points or the agenda of the Democrats or the Republicans. We feel like there's energy on both sides. And we've seen that, like you mentioned, Donald Trump and his campaign, but also a lot of the populist anti-war work that's been going on the left, and trying to harness that. It's not easy in a polarized society right now, particularly in Washington. But we feel like the only way that we are going to bust up the war party, which is bipartisan, is to work together across the aisle. And so part of my job at the Quincy Institute is to manage that transpartisan mission. And it, like I said, it's a challenge in this environment, but I feel like most Americans understand it and want it, and they're tired of the partisanship. They're tired of the acrimony, and they're tired of endless wars as well. So that's basically what I do every day when I go to work, is try to advance this a little more. And as an editor, I'm able to feature and highlight not just writers on our staff, but contributors from all over academia, ex-military, former government officials, journalists, people who can't get published anywhere else because there's gatekeepers all over Washington who say you have to think this way about foreign policy, and if you don't ascribe to their narrative on the way things should work, which is usually some narrow band of like, you support the war, but also humanitarian intervention, or just full on hawk. You don't find a lot of people are saying, wait a minute, why are we going into these places in the first place? Spreading democracy at the butt of a gun, it's not working, So I feel like we're offering a platform for people who have been kind of shut out from the conversation for a long time now.
Hey folks, I want to take a moment to talk about something that has truly changed my life, and that is Cardio Miracle, our incredible studio sponsor. Now, I'll be honest, when I first heard about Cardio Miracle and their claims about improving heart health, I was skeptical. But after using it for just about 2 months, I was absolutely blown away by the results. First, my blood pressure went from being consistently around 140/90 to a much more healthier and manageable 120/80. And my resting heart rate dropped from the low 70s to the high 50s. And I couldn't believe it. But the benefits didn't stop there. I started sleeping better, and I felt more energized at the gym, and my heart felt the best it's felt in years. And it's not just me. Hundreds of you, our amazing listeners, have reached out to share your own incredible experiences with Cardio Miracle. So, what is Cardio Miracle, and how does it work? It's a carefully crafted supplement that harnesses the power of nitric oxide to support optimal heart function. So, by increasing nitric oxide levels in your blood, Cardio Miracle helps relax your blood vessels, improve circulation, and it protects your heart from damage. It's like giving your heart the support it needs to function at its best. And here's the best part. We've got an exclusive offer just for you, our loyal listeners here at the Brian Nichols Show. When you head over to cardiomiracle.com and use code TBNS at checkout, you'll get an extra 15% discount on your order. Plus, with their 100% money-back guarantee, you've got nothing to lose and everything to gain. So, if you're ready to take control of your heart health and experience the life-changing benefits of Cardio Miracle for yourself, just click the link in the show notes or video description. Trust me, your heart will thank you. And don't wait another day to prioritize your health. Join the tens of thousands of folks who have already discovered the Cardio Miracle difference. Head to cardiomiracle.com now and use code TBNS for 15% off your order. Your journey to a happier and healthier heart starts today. And now, let's get back to the show. Well, I want to go back to something you said, and that is the 70 years worth of foreign policy that we've seen here in the United States. And as a sales guy, one of the worst expressions I can ever hear when I talk to any company is, well, you know what, Brian, we've just always done things this way. And I'm like, well, there's our problem. And that speaks to, I think, where we are today as a country and frankly as a world, right? You know, we were in this uniparty or unipolar moment where United States was pretty much the only superpower. And you fast forward to where we are today, that's changed. A lot has changed. And in sales and in business, the best way to get people to reconsider a different way of doing things is by starting out by acknowledging that elephant in the room, that things have changed. So let's talk about that, because when you look at how things have changed, I think a lot of people, and Kelley, this is just the elephant in the room from a listener, voter standpoint, like we have all the things in our own life that we have to focus on. You know, your mom and dad's going to the grocery store, looking at the shopping cart saying, I hope I can afford all of this, trying to juggle in, you know, the three different jobs that they have while trying to get the kids to go to the sports ball practice or the dance recitals. Like every average day person, they're not really thinking about this stuff. And yet it is their tax dollars that will, you know, be sent thousands of miles overseas to, you know, bomb some little village or, you know, go after some wedding where a potential terrorist might be. And we don't really see the impacts of that ourselves besides that dollars and cents. So let's talk about the things that we're missing, right? And why we're seeing right now an electorate who's waking up and saying, well, maybe we've done things this way, but is that the best way to really do things? So what is the feeling, I guess, on the ground right now, Kelley?
Well, I mean, I think the best way to put it, quoting you, is people are waking up, and they have been waking up, I would say, since the mid 2010s. And that's why you had this emergence of Donald Trump, who felt liberated enough as a Republican to say, we went to Iraq based on a lie, and it was a massive failure. And he, in his own indomitable way, was very blunt about it. This was a failure. And half the country, if you say half the country is Republican or conservative, maybe independent, leaning right, said, ooh, I've been thinking the same way, but I was kind of afraid to say it because the Republican Party has been so supportive of going to these wars. And if you say anything bad about them, that somehow you're not supporting the men and women in the military. And there was this whole stigma on, vocalizing dissent in terms of our war policies. And this goes back decades, back to the Vietnam War. And I feel Donald Trump, just in those debates before the 2016 election, coming out and saying the war was a lie based on a lie, WMDs, and it was a failure, basically unleashed an anti-war sentiment. And I say anti-war, not in a sense of like being against all wars, but being against the global war on terror that resulted in endless U.S. military operations overseas. They had become so routine that Americans were really kind of just sort of blocking them out. And the government was taking advantage of this by not reporting all the bad news, or just, minimally reporting, okay, we've had this incursion here and this operation here and victories right around the corner. And it became sort of like white noise for Americans. And then they really needed somebody to stand up and say, this is still going on and it's a massive failure. And I think a lot of military communities across the country were saying, yeah, our sons and daughters, our husbands and wives, they've been in constant military deployment cycles since 2001. And the National Guards of each state were being pulled into this as though they were permanent active duty. And then they'd come home with injuries. They'd come home with PTSD. Their divorce was rampant. So I feel like a lot of energy, very negative energy, was bubbling up from the right and from among conservatives. And then on the left too, you had progressives, anti-war people, independents, like libertarians. Everybody's like, hey, we've had enough of this. And what did that do? That opened up a space so people could actually look back and say, what went wrong? And what we were being told about why we needed to be in Afghanistan for 20 years, why we needed to fight in Iraq in the first place, what counterterrorism means. Why do we have kill lists and extrajudicial killings of people and no accountability for what we're doing for the last 20 years? We have a refugee crisis. So people were saying, hey, not in our name, basically. And I think that opened up a space for places like the Quincy Institute, which is pretty unique in it being transpartisan and all, but to say, hey, America is ripe for change. And I can talk more about this, but I feel like when you ask me what's going on the ground, I feel like, anywhere outside the Beltway, Americans understand that the military should not be used to spread democracy, promote our values. It should not be used to police the world. And we as a country need to take care of our own homes and our own backyards and our own economy and fix all of these fissures that we have in our society. We don't need to be fixing other people's messes or fighting on behalf of other countries, in these security agreements and these entangling alliances that we have, in which we're just told by Washington, well, we have to go and fight because we have a treaty here and and the partners are over here and special relationships over there. And after a while, people are like, well, we don't understand where does our interest come in? What does this mean for me? What is this doing? Is this actually working? So I feel like for the first time since probably Vietnam, that people, the scales are off the eyes and people are asking important questions and they're not afraid to question it, like they're going to be called unpatriotic or against the troops. I think people are all finished with that.
Well, and that was the narrative, right? You go back to, I'm old enough to remember there, Kelley, like as far back as 20 years ago when we had the Iraq war. And it was like the whole, they actually changed the phrase. It used to be united we stand, together we fall. They changed it just to indoctrinate folks to united we stand, divided we fall, implying that, well, if you don't support us, then you want to see us fail. You want to see America suck. Yeah. And it's like, no, that's me trying to be a rational thinking human being saying A plus B isn't equaling C. I'm told that this country that's literally on the opposite side of the world is a threat, even though they have nothing that seems to be of a threat to me. They might maybe impact their surrounding neighbors, but like, how is this impacting me directly? Is it impacting me directly? Oh, it's not? Then why are my tax dollars going overseas? Why are we trillions of dollars in debt? Literally $34 trillion to this point. And you can look at a large chunk of that and say, well, thank you, the military warfare state, especially over the past 20 years. That's where a lot of that's come from. Now, that's obviously not taking into account all the unfunded liabilities and the social welfare programs, which 100%, they are huge bloat when it comes to our actual country's debt. But when you look at the military industrial complex, which the Quincy Institute is focusing on trying to change this narrative, right? Like Boeing, Raytheon, you name the company out there that's raking in the tens of millions, I'd say even into the billions of dollars at this point, because they just have a wheelbarrow going from the U.S. Treasury right to their bank accounts, it seems, when we have more and more of these foreign interventions. So I say all that, Kelley, we look at the Quincy Institute, and I know you guys have really 5 key principles when it comes to trying to help educate the American public. And granted, here at the Brian Nichols Show, we 100% agree that education is a huge aspect, and we try to educate, enlighten, and inform here at the show. So let's dig into the education standpoint. And with that, let's articulate first the public interest. What should the U.S. foreign policy look like as it really reflects the actual public's interest, not the folks in D.C. who pretend to represent the public's interest?
I mean, we look at it like there's like two pillars. One, how do we make our country safe? And how do we make our country prosperous? And, you know, if what our policies are doing overseas is having the opposite effect, which I can argue that many of them are, then let's get rid of them. And I feel like our politicians have not been able to articulate why things like the Ukraine war going on for as long as it has, the special relationship that we have with Israel that sends them $4 billion in unconditional aid every year to build up their military, the most powerful military in the Middle East. Why does that continue? And does it make us safer and more prosperous at home? These are uncomfortable questions. Why does it make us safer and more prosperous to continue operations in Somalia that most people don't even know are still going on? There are members in Congress who don't have a bird's eye view of what we're doing in Somalia, much less the people outside the Beltway and in the heartland. And so I can go on and on. What about NATO? I mean, what is the mission, the future mission of NATO? Has NATO actually been made obsolete now that the Cold War is over? Now there will be millions of people who would.
I was going to say, Kelley, I don't think so, because rumor is they're trying to include what, Ukraine and 3 other new nations, even though the Soviet Union hasn't existed for 30 plus years.
Right, and supposedly now that they have a democratizing element that nobody knew about, they've sort of kind of threw that in there because they need a mission. They need a mission to sustain the bureaucracy that's built up around NATO. And so there are so many of these issues where you can just say, what is the U.S. interest? Is this making us safe? Is this making us prosperous? I don't think that's too much to ask. And I don't think that that's a partisan question either. I think we just had a conference called What a Foreign Policy for the Middle Class Really Looks Like. That doesn't mean middle class Democrats, middle class Republicans, left or right, liberal or conservative. It's like Americans. What does this foreign policy? I mean, we can get down into the weeds on what that would look like. But personally, I think that would be scaling back on the military industrial complex and the influence that the major prime contractors like Raytheon and Boeing and Lockheed Martin, the influence that they have on the top executive E-ring of the Pentagon, and their ability to monopolize all of our weapon systems, all of the programs, have created a situation where things like the F-35 don't fly right, or the littoral combat ship has to be decommissioned because it's obsolete. Why is that happening in the richest, most productive country in the world? Because
meanwhile, our Boeing 737s are literally falling apart as they're going from point A to point B.
Right. There's something sick and wrong and corrupt in the whole system. And so it's like, it's a tough job. It's like brick by brick. And so you have the military industrial complex is one part of the thing that, that we've been doing. The democratizing foreign policy. What does that mean? Well, it's keeping foreign influence out of our foreign policy. You have no idea. And not you personally, but I don't think American people have a good grasp on how many millions, if not billions of dollars go into lobbying members of Congress from the outside.
And by the way, Kelley, if you could articulate what lobbying actually look like when we talk about situations like this, because the average person, they hear this and they're like, lobbying sounds bad, but they don't realize how bad it actually is. Could you paint the picture for us?
I mean, I'm going to give you the most egregious example that I can think of, and it's an older one. This is like way back in the day.
Hit us with it.
There are the 9/11 families wanted to sue Saudi Arabia because of mounting evidence that Saudi Arabia, the government of Saudi Arabia, had connections to the 9/11 hijackers. And this is a huge court case that's been going on. And Saudi Arabia wants to make sure that no, we need to be immune from these lawsuits. And so what they did is they poured a ton of money into local lobbying firms who went and then hired U.S. veterans, unbeknownst that those U.S. veterans, they did not know that the money was coming from Saudi, and basically had these U.S. veterans going up on the Hill and knocking on doors of members of Congress and saying, oh, you can't support this bill that would allow for lawsuits. Like basically doing the bidding of the Saudi government because they couldn't do it directly. And then it turned out these veterans found out they were being used. They were being used by a middleman that was paid by Saudi Arabia because Saudi Arabia wanted to influence our legislative system for a preference, an outcome that would be preferable to them. And they ended up winning, and we can't sue. And that's a broader conversation. It's very complicated, but just for listeners here, it's when a foreign country can come in and pay local K Street lobbyists to basically go on the Hill and advocate for policies, bills, legislation, what have you, that country prefers. That would have a positive outcome. And so and they're not all nefarious countries like Saudi Arabia or China or Russia or Taiwan or whatever. Like they're not like super controversial. Like I think some of the biggest lobbying, the biggest pots of lobbying cash that come in are on behalf of NATO countries and allies of the United States, like Japan. They just want to make sure that their interests are covered. So when money is being doled out or weapons sales are being considered to that particular country, that the skids are greased. And, lobbying is not a dirty word in itself. The issue with the foreign lobby is that in many cases, the lobbyists are not registering as foreign agents, which is the law, or they're not disclosing these ties. So it's unclear that there is a little hand working from outside the country. And then, so this is a complicated issue. But that's one of the things that Quincy does is basically fighting for more sunlight to come in. And if you're a foreign country and you're doing all sorts of lobbying, we want it to be disclosed. If you're a foreign country and you're giving a lot of money to a think tank, and those think tanks are writing all these reports on how, country X should get, 6 fighter jets, and then they should have other weapon systems on a glide path over. We want to know that country paid for that report, or paid that think tank to have a program that is specifically very positive. We want to know when the defense industry is paying, different think tanks. I mean, that's another thing. You have defense industry influence in think tanks all over town. And some of them disclose it and some of them don't. But guess what? They're all very pro-war, very pro-military, very pro and bulking up on their competition with China. And so part of our thing is using sunlight as a disinfectant for this swampiness that skews the way Americans understand how these policies are made and how they're not necessarily made with the best interests of the American people, but for these super big special interests like foreign countries and the defense industry.
And in completely unrelated news, the Pentagon last year failed their 6th audit in a row with literally trillions of dollars, just like, so that's fun. No, I dare say they are related, but Kelley, that might be a different conversation for a different day because we are already, unfortunately, hard pressed for time. So what we want to do here as we go towards the end of the show is we like to give our final thoughts, and with that, a call to action. So my final thoughts, and this just speaks to why this conversation is so important, is that you, and I'm saying you, member of the audience, more often than not, don't know where your money goes when you hand it off to Uncle Sam on my birthday, April 15th. So what happens is you just send your money off, and then the government takes that money and pretty much does whatever they want with it. And they'll tell you afterwards why it's so important for them to do those things. And with that, make sure that if you don't pay your money to them, they will put you in a cage for an indiscriminate amount of time they deem as a fitting punishment. So just understand that even though you think that you're doing the American duty, you're doing your, what is it, God, marriage, and taxes, those are like the constants in life. It's something like that. But look at where your money's going and actually try to get interested. I know everybody out there has all these different things happening in their lives, different commitments, responsibilities, priorities. I get it. I'm right there with you. I'm a new dad. I have my own business. I have my own day jobs. I have all these different responsibilities and obligations, but it's so important for us to be aware of what's happening in our world, and specifically with our country and where your money is going. Because even if you're like, well, that wasn't my fault, that was the government doing that. You are the one who helped create the situation by voting for these folks. So if we want to see things change, it does start with us. Now, that does not touch the other aspect we talked about, which is those bureaucracies. And if you want to understand more of how bureaucracies work, just go watch this great documentary called The Office, back from the 2000s. It's not really a documentary, but they talk about, in one episode, they have a budget that's going to be coming down, and they have to get rid of the money. So they either are going to go ahead and buy new office chairs or invest it in a brand new copier. That's how this works on the macro scale. When you scale it up to the government, we're no longer in Dunder Mifflin Paper Company in little old Scranton, PA. No, this is, look at your Pentagon, look at your federal government, and look at how they have those exact same incentive structures in place, both good and bad. So address that accordingly and adapt accordingly. That's my final thoughts. Kelley, what do you have for us on your end?
I agree with everything you just said, that because I feel that most Americans are foursquare with us. They don't like what they've seen with the wars. They don't like what they're seeing on the television every night, but they have other things going on in their lives. And what I'd like to stress is exactly what you said, that there is an impact. There's an impact at the grocery store. How much more money could stay here in the United States and affect wherever in your life? It could, your healthcare costs, the education costs, public services, whatnot. All that money is going out. And don't listen to what members of Congress and even the Biden administration say, that somehow the war in Ukraine, the $166 billion that we've sent there, is somehow firing up and serving as an engine for the U.S. economy. Because there are many, many studies out there that say that the war economy or the defense industry is not the best way for Americans to spend their money. It's critical that Americans need to pay attention to that, because I feel like they get fooled into thinking that the defense industry is an industry that we have to keep firing up. And if we start closing down weapon systems and closing down some of these programs, that somehow we'll lose jobs and communities will dry up and wither away. And that's not true. There's plenty of things that we could be spending our money on. So if you want to think of it as like the real connection is, think of that money that you're sending overseas, and think about what it's doing in your name, and think about whether or not you feel safer as an American, and what kind of future that we are leaving for our children. And I understand that sometimes it can be overwhelming, because, like, how do you fix it? How do you fix this huge Death Star that is the Pentagon, the military industrial complex? I think the more you learn, and I say, please go to responsiblestatecraft.org, because we have all sorts of issues regionally, the politics here in Washington, the military industrial complex. And I feel like the more informed that you get on these issues, the more emboldened you might be to actually reach out to your member of Congress and say, I'm all done with this.
Yep. And
have a reformed opposition to the policy, because I don't think these politicians hear enough from Americans. And so they feel emboldened to just continue the status quo in Washington. And I know that sounds cliche, but I feel like the more informed that you can be about this, the more fired up you're going to get. And I appreciate you even talking about this with me on the show, because I feel like I want to reach more people that are outside of this beltway and start really convincing people that foreign policy really does affect you, even though it might not be intuitively in terms of what the connections are on a daily basis.
I think too, there's a very infamous meme, and it was a picture of a bunch of rockets lined up, and it goes, my foreign policy can look like this, so Pakistan's gender studies programs can look like this. And then it shows that, but then underneath it, you also see your roads that are completely destroyed. So that is the direct correlation, by the way, folks. You are watching your money be sent overseas when we have very real issues here. But Brian, it's not this or that. When we're $34 trillion in debt, I think we have to really start having some tough conversations, number one. Number two, and I just want to end with this, Kelley, because you said something that as a sales guy, it rings so true. I have lost more deals, not to competition, but to the status quo than I like to care to remember. But at the end of the day, that is my biggest competition. It is not some other competitor out there who's trying to get a company to move from where they are to something new, but rather it is the actual act of moving from something that they have to something new. And that therein lies the American problem, especially as it pertains to our foreign policy, because so many folks aren't just sitting there saying, let me bring a new solution to the table, but rather, we have this solution. Can we make this one work?
Right.
And the answer is no. The answer is 70 years worth of data to, I think, pretty much effectively and adamantly say no. So I think that's where we're going to go ahead and put a nice bow on today's episode. So with that being said, Kelley Vlahos, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Folks, if you want to learn more, you can check out the Quincy Institute. Also, Trip to the Beltway Fantastic. What is that, Kelley? And where can folks go ahead and maybe check this? What is that, a podcast? Go ahead and check that out.
Yep. Trip the Beltway Fantastic. It's a sort of a turn on the phrase Trip the Light Fantastic, which in the 1920s what meant let's go dancing. So it's a new podcast I have. You can check it out on YouTube and Substack, but basically talking about all the stuff that you and I just went over, and having special guests to talk about different things, like whether it be the U.S. military abroad or the swamp here in Washington. My only qualification, if you come on my show, is basically we don't want status quo and we don't want swamp creatures. So we just started about 2 months ago. So
awesome. Well, we'll make sure we include that link plus links to the Quincy Institute all here in the show notes. So it's super easy for folks to go ahead and find you, Kelley. And also, with that being said, too, I just have a feeling this is going to be a part one of a several part conversation, because this is, in fact, the tip of the iceberg as we go through foreign policy. Yeah. So we're going to have to continue this conversation. So, folks, if you want to go ahead and check out those subsequent conversations that will be coming down the road, here's what you got to do. First and foremost, go ahead and share today's episode. Please go ahead, tag yours truly at B Nichols Liberty on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. But most importantly, that is to please go ahead and support the show. You got to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a single time we have awesome new conversations like this one we had here today with Kelley drop. So you're going to head to your favorite podcast catcher, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, wherever it is you consume your podcast content, and you're going to hit that magical subscribe button. Now, when you hit that subscribe button, also go into the archives. You're going to notice we have over 850 episodes here of the show. That is one of only 2 places you can find the entirety of the archives that are the Brian Nichols past shows. Reason being because over on, some of our favorite video platforms, not counting Rumble or Twitter, but Facebook, YouTube, they're a little, censorious. So we got, a couple slaps on the wrists, slaps in other places, because we dare talk about the COVID insanity and the government response to the COVID insanity. Apparently we were considered harmful, hurtful content for having, doctors and experts on our show who didn't agree with official narratives. Weird how that happened. So we had to take some, I would say controversial. I'll just use that word for the sake of the episode, controversial episodes down from YouTube. So if you want to check out all those past episodes in their entirety where we talk about all the stuff, yes, you need to know, head to briannicholsshow.com, or yes, the podcast version of the show where you can find all the past episodes of the program in their entirety, all 850 plus. And then one final plug, and that is to please support the folks who support us, because they're the ones who keep the lights on. So our amazing studio sponsor, Cardio Miracle, best heart health supplement in the world. Make sure you go ahead, give them some love. Plus our other amazing sponsors. We have Liquid Freedom, Energy Tea, Ebles, CBD, and more. All those sponsors can be found at briannicholsshow.com/sponsors. Kelley, we are going to go ahead and say goodbye to the audience today. Any final words as we wrap things up?
No, I just hope you have me back because we got plenty more to talk about.
Oh, 150,000%, or 34 trillion%. We'll see. With that being said, Brian Nichols signing off here on the Brian Nichols Show for Kelley Vlahos from the Quincy Institute. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.